I guess this brings us on to the interest. Well, I'd say one of the most interesting parts, which is sort of voluntary versus government. So obviously we've got COP26 happening later this year, which may or may not produce some meaningful objectives and actual sort of targets. So back to our legacy data centers, do you think there'd come a time, for example, when government might say, if your PUE or whatever metric it uses is above this, you've got to shut down your data center within, like we're all going to have to turn from petrol and diesel cars by a certain date, presumably, and then it'll all be electric. Will that happen to the data center industry? Will it voluntarily get there ahead of it? I know it's a bit of a sort of open-ended question, but I guess is the industry capable of regulating itself, or will it need legislation of some description to say, these behaviors are no longer acceptable by, these dates or whatever?
Thanks. Okay.
And you've only got 2 minutes for your answer. No, sorry.
Excuse me. Okay, so this is really this is a bag of worms question, and effectively we don't have any visibility of overall data center energy use in the world. There have been some studies made, and there's been some experimentation, and there's been some alarming figures published. And I think a lot of this is to do with the fact that nobody has a real handle on how much data centers are actually using in terms of energy consumption. So in the UK, for instance, we know that the commercial data centers, which have applied to be on the climate change agreement, use, I think it's just under 3 terawatt hours a year, which represents something like 0.79% of the UK grid. That's just people that have got onto the climate change agreement. And I'm actually going to discuss this in a forthcoming presentation. It's the tip of the iceberg, right? So we've got a really good handle on all of the data centers that are in the climate change agreement. That's like looking at the motor racing organizations around the world and only concentrating on F1, right? So we're forgetting the F2, the F3, the F4, the hill climbs, the rally cross, all of those other motor racing events that go on, we're not calculating energy for. And in this scenario, these are all of the enterprise data centers. They're the mobile phone operators, they're BT, they're Sky's content delivery networks, there's railway signaling systems, for instance, which are technically little data centers, all of those small little kind of outcrops, enterprise data centers, server rooms. There's a huge part of the iceberg that we're not measuring. We're absolutely not measuring it. So we don't know how much energy is actually being used. Problem being is that policymakers concentrate on the available data they have. Their available data is the stuff that comes out from people that have registered to go to a scheme. So climate change agreement in the UK, EU code of conduct, for instance, which of course is woefully underreported. And they're basing their decisions on that. And of course, what will happen is they'll probably legislate at some point, and they'll catch a lot of people out. The smaller organisations will end up having to, put a report in on how much energy they use. The Climate Neutral Data Centre Pact, which covers, I think it's around 40 organisations at the moment across Europe, including all of the major co-location operators and some of the cloud guys. They put forward 6 distinct principles covering energy efficiency, clean energy, water use, circular economy, and waste heat. And that's still in discussion with the Commission as to how they're going to report that and what the target should be. The Climate Neutral Data Centre Pact says they are targets, and they see the code of conduct as the means for their organisations to reach those targets, which is all good, from my perspective and from the group's perspective. You could argue that the data center industry and the big IT players have, for the last 10 years, been promoting the shift into cloud. Right? Don't do your IT crunching in your own server room, which is probably poorly designed, overcooled, and very, very inefficient. Into our nice, brand, shiny new data centers, which have got exceptional PUEs and you're using a virtual stack, and this will improve your energy. I mean, I was looking at something last week, reciting that you'll get a 76% energy reduction moving your on-site data to a cloud data. And that's fine, you know, it's marketing blurb. I don't really think it's correct, but that's for them to decide. Because you'll always need your data center or even a smaller room, because you need to have access to the big wide internet, right? And that will cost you energy because you'll have your networking equipment. You'll keep some of your IT in-house equipment that you don't really want to put into the cloud, or something that you're using which isn't cloud friendly or cloud native. And so you will all, you know, so you're not completely shutting down your on-site server room and sticking everything in the cloud. You're only shifting a proportion of it into the cloud, and that's likely to be commodity compute. In order for the Commission and legislation to be fairly targeted, then they're going to have to ask for some sort of data center registration system where you are reporting your data center energy use to a central body for check-in. And it may well be that in the future, if you do not reach certain thresholds, you will be forced to shut down and move into the cloud, potentially. I think that would be a huge step to take by the Commission, and potentially a very dangerous one for them, because, you know, how do you police such a vast estate? You know, everybody thinks it's just the big data centers that need doing, but actually the energy savings that are available in underneath the waterline on that iceberg, we calculated that UK government alone could probably save £77 million per annum by doing stuff to get rid of their small server rooms. And they're probably realizing that now as part of the Greening Government ICT initiative. But yeah, it's interesting. And then of course, on the other hand, we've got this explosion in edge, right? So edge to me is just going back to on-site server rooms. So we can't have this kind of, we've got a paradox there, and they kind of bang on to each other. If we're, you know, 5G, Internet of Things, edge, all that sort of stuff, it doesn't really match. There's something fundamentally wrong in pursuing that approach.
Yeah, and just before we close, I mean, we sort of moved from pure energy efficiency, I guess, over to sort of sustainability. So, what, as an individual, or as an association, probably more as an individual in the association, do you have a view on? You know, clearly the climate change phenomenon is never been more high profile, I guess. And you know, like again recently, you know, I think France have announced they're going to ban internal flights where you can get the train instead for, you know, for up to 2.5 hours, whatever. So they're beginning to be encroachments on people's freedoms, whatever you want to call it. Do you think that is increasingly the way forward? And are you a positive outlook person that it's all going to turn out all right? Or do you think I mean, my favorite phrase is the old deck chairs on the Titanic. Are we moving rapidly towards that stage where no matter what we do, it's all a bit too late? I'll give you a little bit longer to answer this one if you want. But
personal point of view, I think, you know, we've had a current lifestyle. So probably over the last 50 or 60 years or so, you know, living in houses and being able to go to get food from supermarkets and generally going shopping and being able to fly everywhere and having second homes in formerly that we could get to quite easily. Now obviously our stay in our second homes in Spain is somewhat curtailed because of Brexit. But, you know, that's a relatively recent thing. You know, it's yes, it's in our lifetimes, but if you go back 150 years, most people didn't travel. You know, there wasn't any aircraft, so we couldn't do that. And I think what will happen is that the pandemic has shown, for instance, that society as it stands now can function without the aviation industry, and it can function without the shops being open because we can buy all online. You know, and with the exception of the hospitality industry, you know, we've managed to do it with these pandemic-related restrictions on our freedom to move around and everything. I think we need to understand that, ultimately it is now a climate emergency, right? We have to reconfigure the way that we live our lives, and the data center industry will need to reconfigure how it operates in order to fit in with this new scenario. Right? The new normal has completely changed. And I don't think a lot of people in the industry have quite got that yet. They are, every day goes by on LinkedIn and other places, you get, we're going to build a huge data center here, and we're going to build a new huge data center here, and we're rolling out all of the edge. This is completely counter to what the world wants in terms of decarbonisation. We're adding electrical use into the grid, in a grid that is actually crumbling at the moment in terms of its resilience, its capacity to emergency situations. 2 years ago, there was a trip at one of the power stations. Almost everybody in the country experienced a power cut of at least an hour. And that was just one switch going down. And of course, a lot of the power was coming from a wind farm out in the North Sea that tripped as well. And you can look at this online and everything. And the thing is, I've been looking through a couple of recent planning applications. So there is a data center. I'm not going to name them. I'm not even going to tell you where they are. But in the planning application, it said that we will need 61 megawatt diesel generators to support the data center if it goes down or the grid fails. My view there is, we're in the 21st century. We've got the EU Code of Conduct that says consider use of alternative generation. We've got the whole decarbonisation measures going, and yet these guys are still planning to put 61 megawatt diesel NOx and SOx and particulate particle producing backup generators, which they'll be planning to test probably on a monthly basis for their data center solution. It's not good enough, Phil, right? These are brand new designs or brand new facilities. The industry, and especially on the design side of things, they need to wake up, right? We cannot keep installing 20th century engineering in data centers when there are tried and tested alternatives out there. There's another organization that's really taken on this grasp, and they're basically putting gas generators on their sites, not diesel, right? Now, those units can be CHP units. That means that we can provide heat to local communities on the district heating system. The industry has to wake up, and it needs to wake up fast, right? The 20th century design is not cutting the mustard. They have to change. And if that means a fundamental redesign of the data center powertrain and a fundamental redesign of the cooling and a fundamental, change in the way that we think, how we interact with our neighbors, then we're going to have to do that. And the people that will be successful moving forward will be the people that grasp those three elements, in my opinion. So in terms of the question, I'll make no bones about it. It's going to be a difficult task, right? New designs will have to be very radical and innovative. That may mean that some legacy data centers will have to close down because they're just not cutting the mustard. We need a fundamental shift in our thinking. The industry needs to stop kind of concentrating on uptime and resilience, and it needs to start thinking about decarbonisation, energy efficiency, providing the services that we need to provide with the appropriate levels of uptime, which is justified by the application, right? And that's a code of conduct best practice principle. I remember going to when I was working for a company, I remember going to a big supermarket type clothes retailer. And I was doing a disaster recovery exercise, and I asked the senior board what they felt was the most important application that the data center was responsible for. And they all said C-suite email. Okay. And I went, oh, no, I'm sorry, but think that, then you should really be looking to get another job, because your most important applications are your electronic point of sale system that allows you to sell the goods that you're selling in your shops, and your logistics system, which enables you to put the goods that you've just sold back into your shops. C-suite email, my friends, is not a mission critical application, because you can pick up the telephone, or you can get off your ass, walk to the office next door to talk to your fellow C-suite person. It's not a mission critical application at all. Problem, I think, with the industry, and something it really needs to get a grip on, is that currently we treat all IT applications as being priority one if they're in the data center. And we really need to start graduating them. So only the absolute mission critical ones that keep our services up and running, or the society up and running, are treated as P1. And everything else we can deal with a little bit of downtime. Right? And in that way, we can completely, radically change the way that we think about data centers and how we operate them efficiently. I've met people that would say to me, well, everything in the data centers is priority one. And I'm saying, no, it's not. We are wasting energy on keeping systems up that really don't need to be kept up. Do you need to have your email system on 24/7, 365 when there's nobody in the office to take those calls? It's just things like we need to think about how we look at the applications and what level of kind of importance they have. And at the moment, everything's deemed ultra important. And I think if we start to really look at it and go, no, that application is not important, that doesn't need to be up 24/7, 365, it's costing us money. Now, I remember doing, we installed some software on our university a couple of years ago. And it showed that they would save 40,000 a month if PCs were shut down in one building, right? So there was about 400 people working in that building. They would have saved 40,000 a month if PCs were put in automatic. So they basically put out a policy and said, right, as of such and such, your PC will have a group policy object, which will shut down your PC at 7 o'clock in the evening. And there'll be a graceful shutdown period, and it will save everything that you've got, and you won't lose any of your data or any work you're doing. And the kickback from some of the academics, was beyond belief. Like, oh, you can't possibly turn my PC off. I'm using it. Blah, blah, blah. I access it remotely. So we kind of postponed that particular rollout, and I said, what we'll do is we'll look at the Radius server, and we'll see if anybody remote in access their PC. And we put it on there for 3 months. Do you know how many people remoted in to access their servers or their PCs from home over the weekend or in the evenings? None. Right? So, we as people need to think about sustainability, and having your PC up and running when it's not being used. For yourself, you might think, it's only a couple of kilowatts. Yeah, it's nothing. But think about multiplying that with all the people that have got access to the internet over time in every country in the world. That's a huge amount of wasted energy, just because we can't be bothered to put our PCs into shutdown to a lower power state. Televisions do have automatic turn-offs. In order to meet our climate emergency, we need to think about what we're doing on a personal level. And I think that corporate bodies that are providing services to many, many people also need to think about how they deliver those services.
And And is it right to say that human nature being what it is, that it'll probably require some kind of legislative nudge along or nudges along the way to say, look, even if it's, if you don't change your ways, this is what's going to happen to you, rather than just introduce a blanket, overnight, you can't do that anymore. Sort of a classic carrot and stick approach. Do you think that's likely to be the way forward?
I think but it's the government's already did it with petrol and diesel cars not being sold from whenever it is 2024, and that's forced the vehicle manufacturers to basically say that they're decarbonising and they're going to provide those electric vehicles. I go one step further. What car do you drive, Phil?
Me, diesel Passat, which I bought when diesel cars were supposed to be more environmentally friendly than petrol cars, and then apparently they're no longer that. But it changes every few years, which is perhaps part of the problem.
And I take it it's on your drive at the moment.
It is indeed. Well, I hope so. Yes.
Yeah, and how many hours a day does it sit on your drive?
Well, at the moment, obviously during the pandemic, because I've I work from home a lot anyway, so it hasn't done a lot of miles in the last 12 months.
Yeah, I think when I used to work for the company I worked for, I used to basically, I was parked outside my house overnight, so there's 8 hours there. I'd spend like 2.5 hours driving to a location. The car would be parked in their car park, and then I'd use it for 3 hours coming home in the afternoon. Now, I could have used public transport for all of those journeys if I wanted to. Yes, it's a little bit, you really want to be on a bus or train for that period of time and without you carrying tools or anything. But that's for the engineering class. For most people that commute to work, it literally sits outside the door for 8 hours, and then they use it for an hour to get to work, and it sits in a car park there, and then it's parked, it comes back again. Governments will be looking at using more public transport. It's one of the principles for the energy emergency is for better provision of public transport solutions and to get to more places. And in the urban environment, that's great. If I lived in London, I would never have a car. There's no point. Absolutely no point. I can get on the DLR, I can get on the tube network, I can get on the public, I can get on the bus even. Right? And wherever it goes, I won't be more than half an hour walk from where I live to be able to get on. But people still have cars in London. I can't understand it, because it's like somebody's taking money out of your wallet on a daily basis. You're either paying for parking, you have to pay for a parking permit, you run the risk of parking, traffic wardens. You can't go across a red light, or if you go into a different box, some remote IT system is hitting you with a fine. It's just crazy that we would do that in the rural areas. Yeah, I completely get it. We live quite rural. We live about 5 miles from the major town. Going to get shopping from there would be, as a right pain if we didn't have the car. But we've gone to online. So every Wednesday we get a delivery from our local supermarket with all of our stuff. And to be honest, we're sitting there looking at the car and I'm thinking, that's £200 a month on a lease that I spent. My wife's looking at me now and saying, "It's like, don't you take my car off me." Yeah, I mean, we've got a Kia Niro hybrid, so self-charging hybrid, and we've had things happen recently where we're likely to be mortgage free in a couple of months' time. So now I'm thinking, so shall I divert the mortgage payment and getting myself a kind of higher spec car? And then the devil on my other shoulder, or the saint, says, "Hold on a minute, you're a sustainability expert. You should be setting an example." And when I first started my business, I bought myself a smart car. So I was driving around to all of my clients in my smart car. But yeah, I mean, most of our travel at the moment is by public transport. I get the trains frequently, but I've been doing that for the last 7 years. I very rarely use the car, but I understand why we need it. But other people need to think about how they're using their the trappings of success, I suppose, in terms of that. So yeah, coming back to the question, I'm an optimist. I think that we will eventually get to where we need to get to. There will be some casualties along the way, though, and we may have to give up some of our freedoms. That I remember about 10 years ago thinking, because I lived in London, if I wanted to, I could go to Paris for lunch. I'd jump on the Eurostar, 2.5 hours there, sit in Paris, have lunch, have a few beers, and then get the last Eurostar back. No, but I never did it. Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to use it. So yeah, I think it's an exciting opportunity that we have to decarbonize the data center industry. That most of the technologies are available for us to do that. It's just a question of the senior people, making a decision and doing it. But they have a world view where they're still stuck in the kind of late 70s, early 80s, and they think that energy is not really a problem and that they can completely suck that energy into their huge things. But I think, getting hold of energy in definitely in the major markets in Europe. So Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, Copenhagen, Oslo, Stockholm, Helsinki. We're seeing that, these are tier one markets and we're seeing unprecedented growth there. But I look at the electrical companies and say, what are your grid expansion plans? What are your retrofitting stuff going on? To the west of London, so Slough, basically, I think Penny from CBRE has calculated that there's 268 megawatts of data center power coming online at the end of this year in 2022. And after that, there isn't any more power, right? That's it. There has to be major grid strengthening, the new power cables, new substations, and they take time. Dublin is already in a problem. Right? It hasn't got sufficient power in Dublin. So, you'll see the growth there as well. Frankfurt, I think the German Energy Authority are spending 650 million euros on upgrading the grid in the Frankfurt area. Paris, and that's a huge project. It's like 2,000, the Greater Paris project, 2,400 megawatts of additional power required in the Paris region. And some of it's for data center upgrades that they've allocated power to. So that's just Amsterdam. Again, there isn't sufficient power there at the moment. You have to really go out of your way to try and get some power. Copenhagen, grid upgrade. Oslo, grid upgrade. Stockholm, grid upgrade. Helsinki, there's no power in Helsinki. It's all in the north. So they're going to have to upgrade their north-south routes to do that. So I think there is a brick wall approaching. And the brick wall is going to be the energy companies when they're going to have to do grid upgrades. And that's very expensive. Good news for the LV and HV manufacturers. But, billions of euros needed to upgrade the grid. And the situation even worse in the States, because they don't have, their grid is really flaky. It's interesting. The one thing I think would probably help would be for all of the governments to say, what, why give data centers special treatment in tax, and why give them special treatment in electricity rates? For instance, in Norway, I think it's just under 5 euro cents a kilowatt. In the UK, it's 12p. In Germany, it's 23p or 23 euro or 0.23 euro cents. So there needs to be a consistency in policy as well. I think that would make a big, and of course that can only be driven by at EU level or at federal level in the States, where they say no, these little tax breaks that you're giving out to attract data centers to a certain area is really not, it's not achieving the stated goals. And of course, the other thing is to do what the Dutch did and have 6 kind of data center expansion zones, but you optimize those zones so that you are adopting district heating solutions, energy flexibility, and you're providing all the necessary bits and pieces. Schiphol, for instance, of a green data center campus, and they're looking at shared services. So this would be sharing the UPS services, the back generation backup services, and the security services for a group of data centers, so they don't have to worry about it. Now, of course, our data center designers very much treating data centers in an island mode. So, you know, they will work even if they're off grid, and that sort of stuff going on. You know, there needs to be a fundamental re-education of some of these people, because there's no point having a data center up and running using backup generators. All the people that are accessing those services can't access them because they've got a local.
Well, that is great. I think we perhaps have, I'm not sure I've set a limit, but I think we probably overrun. But John, it's been great to talk to you. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you for a couple of sherbets at a physical event.
At a physical event even, yes, who knows.
Okay.
Thanks again.
No problem. Thank you.